It was a full moon tonight, and I found myself strangely drawn to its mystique. My name is Ethan Davis, and I'm just your average 16-year-old high school student with a passion for art. My friends often joke that I'm the resident artist of our group, which I don't mind at all. I glanced at my watch, 11:30 p.m. I had spent the last few hours hanging out at my friend Matt's place, playing video games and chatting about our summer plans. We had lost track of time until his mom finally shooed me out the door so we could get some sleep before school tomorrow. After saying goodbye to Matt, I started on the 10-minute walk home. It was an unusually quiet night, the whole neighborhood enveloped in an eerie stillness. Even the trees stood motionless, their branches casting spindly shadows across the empty sidewalks. As I walked, the mesmerizing glow of the full moon kept catching my eye. I couldn't shake the feeling that it was watching my every move. I rounded the corner and paused in front of the entrance to Greenfield Cemetery, my usual shortcut home. I peered through the wrought iron gates into the graveyard bathed in moonlight. Rows of tombstones jutted at odd angles, looked almost alive under the moon's spectral beams. A nervous energy tingled through me as I stood there at the threshold. Maybe it was just my imagination, but the graveyard seemed different tonight. Like something was lurking within its moonlit shadows, waiting for me to step inside. I shook my head, laughing off my foolish thoughts. It was just a cemetery I had passed through 100 times before. And yet still I hesitated, my feet suddenly leaden, refusing to move. "Come on, Ethan, get a grip. What are you afraid of?" I took a deep breath to steel my nerves and stepped through the gates. My shoes crunched lightly on the gravel pathway as I made my way through the rows of graves. I pulled my jacket tighter, shielding against the light autumnal chill. Glancing at my watch again, I picked up my pace. Mom and Emma would be waiting up for me if I took too long. As I hurried along the path, the hairs on my neck prickled. I couldn't shake the uncanny feeling that unseen eyes were watching my every move. The graveyard was deathly silent, and yet somehow it felt alive with a sinister energy. I looked around cautiously. "Hello? Anyone there?" My voice sounded small and afraid. Only silence answered, but the feeling of being watched only grew stronger. I glanced upwards. The moon, partially obscured by wispy clouds, seemed to peer down like a great unblinking eye. Its pale light playing tricks on my eyes, casting illusory shadows between the graves that wavered and stretched as if alive. Fear started rising in my chest as I broke into a jog. I needed to get out of there. But suddenly my shoe caught on a protruding root, sending me sprawling to the ground. I winced as the impact knocked the wind out of me. Gasping, I looked up and went cold with dread. One of the shadows had detached itself from the others. It slowly took on a distinct humanoid form as it crept towards me. Paralyzed by shock, I could only watch as the inky black shadow manifested before my eyes. It moved with an oily, unnatural smoothness, gliding among the tombstones. I wanted to run, but my limbs refused to obey. The shadow being was only feet away now. Where its face should have been was only blankness, devoid of any features. And yet I sensed its sinister intent focused solely on me. Some primal part of my brain finally broke through the paralysis. In blind panic, I sprang to my feet and sprinted towards the gates. I didn't dare to look back, expecting to feel the shadow's grasp upon me at any moment. I ran and ran, lungs burning, until I was through the gates. Only then did I stop and bend over, wheezing. Peering back into the cemetery, I saw only stillness. The animated shadows had vanished as quickly as they had appeared. Panting, I leaned against the cool iron gates to catch my breath. It had to have been some kind of hallucination. Too many late nights, probably. Shadows didn't just come to life, it wasn't possible. And yet, a nagging doubt lingered. I glanced up at the moon suspended low in the night sky. Had its light conjured up those nightmarish visions? I shivered, suddenly wanting nothing more than to get home. I arrived at my house 10 minutes later, heart still pounding against my ribs. I quietly unlocked the front door and slipped inside. The lights were off, except for a single lamp left on for me in the hallway. Seeing it flooded me with relief. I tiptoed upstairs to check on Mom and my little sister Emma. They were both sound asleep. Emma looked angelic, her golden curls splayed over the pillow. I smiled, the last of the tension releasing from my shoulders. Everything was fine. The walk home had just freaked me out, that's all. Nothing sinister here. With that comforting thought, I climbed into bed and switched off the lamp, letting the moonlight wash over me once again. My eyelids grew heavy and I surrendered to sleep, grateful to put the bizarre events of that night behind me. If only I had known then that the horrors were just beginning, that I was about to cross over into a nightmare from which there was no waking. I was running through a forest cloaked in shadow. My heart hammered against my ribs, breath coming in panicked gasps. I didn't know what I was running from, only that it was close behind, closing in on me. I pushed my aching legs faster, my feet pounding against the hard earth. The forest seemed to stretch on without end, the trees looming overhead in a suffocating tangle of branches that blocked out the sky. I desperately turned my head, trying to find a way out, a path, anything. But there was only never-ending trees and darkness. Suddenly I was falling, the ground dropping away into a ravine. Down I plunged into frigid black waters that gripped me, pulling me under. I thrashed and fought, but the dark waters were too strong. I slipped below the surface, cold liquid filling my lungs. And then I was standing in front of my house in the pale morning light. Everything was calm still. Had it only been a nightmare? With trembling hands, I pushed open the front door. "Mom?" I called nervously. No answer. My throat tightened. "Emma?" The house was eerily quiet. I moved from room to room, anxiety building. Where was everyone? The silence was shattered by a blood-curdling scream. I ran towards the sound, heart in my mouth. Bursting into Emma's room, my breath caught at the sight before me. Emma stood at the open window, blank eyes staring vacantly ahead. Then, to my horror, she started slowly climbing onto the ledge. I lunged forward, panicked. "Emma, stop. What are you doing?" But it was like she couldn't hear me. She crept further out on the ledge, her slender frame perilously close to the edge. Frozen in shock, I could only watch helplessly as my little sister leaned forward and let herself fall. "No." The guttural cry was ripped from me as I jolted awake. I lay gasping, coated in cold sweat. My room gradually came into focus, sunlight streaming in. Just a dream. It had felt so horribly real. But Emma was safe. Mom was safe. Just another nightmare. I rubbed the sleep from my bleary eyes. It was Monday morning. With a groan, I dragged myself out of bed and got ready for school. By the time I went downstairs, the nightmare had already faded into hazy memory. I shuffled through the school day in a daze. Exhaustion weighed on my mind like a fog. I could barely keep my eyes open in class as the teachers' voices droned on indistinctly. The bizarre dreams of the past few nights were really taking their toll. Each morning I awoke feeling like I hadn't slept at all. My sketches in art class came out sloppy and half-formed. At lunch, my friends noticed how run down I looked. "Late night again?" Matt asked. I sighed. "You could say that." Matt grinned and elbowed me in the ribs. "Ooh, was it a date? Do tell." I rolled my eyes. "You know me better than that." I sipped my soda. "I just haven't been sleeping well lately." "How come?" I hesitated. The nightmares seemed ridiculous in the sane light of day. "Just some really messed up dreams," I muttered. Matt and the others exchanged glances but didn't push me to explain. The conversation moved on to our math quiz next period. I was grateful not to talk about it further. Somehow saying the dreams aloud would make them feel more real. The exhaustion made the afternoon drag endlessly. But finally the last bell rang and I zombie walked to my locker, looking forward to collapsing into bed early tonight. As I rummaged for my books, a tap on my shoulder made me turn. It was Mr. Reynolds, my art teacher. "Hey Ethan, could I talk to you for a minute?" he asked. Sure." I closed my locker and faced him. Mr. Reynolds's brow was creased with concern. "I wanted to check in with you," he said. "I've noticed your work has been a little off lately. You seem really run down. Is everything okay?" I dropped my gaze, abashed. Had it been that obvious? "I'm fine, really," I said quickly. "Just haven't been sleeping too great." but I'll get back on track with the assignments soon. Mr. Reynolds studied me closely. You know you can talk to me if something's bothering you? I managed a convincing smile. Yeah, of course. I appreciate you checking in. I'll be back to normal in no time. After a few more words of encouragement, I said goodbye and headed out the doors, feeling bad about making him worry. He was right though, I needed to get past whatever was going on in my head and focus. Stepping outside, I took a deep breath of the crisp autumn air. The setting sun cast the sky in hazy amber. I set off towards home, hoping the fresh air would re-energize me. I decided to take a detour through the local park. The tree-lined paths and the sound of kids laughing on the playground helped clear the fog from my brain. I paused on the stone bridge arching over the duck pond, leaning on the railing to watch the waterfowl drifting across the shimmering surface. For a moment, I forgot about the dreams and my exhaustion. Evening was such a peaceful time here. The slanting sunlight washed everything in gold, erasing all the sharp edges. A jogger approached on the path below. He waved up at me. Evening. I smiled and waved back. But as he passed under the bridge, the light shifted strangely, casting the runner's face in shadow. I froze, breath catching in my throat. The face that looked up at me was no longer human. Instead, a monstrous visage leered at me, eyes black pools of malice. I jerked back, heart slamming against my ribs. But in the next instant the light returned to normal. The runner continued on his way, features once again unremarkable. I sagged against the railing, pulse racing. It had only been a trick of the light, a momentary illusion. I took a few deep breaths to steady my rattled nerves. Damn these dreams making me see things. I really was losing it. Shaken, I decided to head straight home and avoid any more detours. Enough weirdness for one day. I picked up my pace, wanting to reach the reassurance of home as quickly as possible. Rounding the corner onto my street, I could see my house down at the end, windows glowing warmly in the dusk. Almost there. Movement in an upstairs window made me glance up. I stopped dead in my tracks. The air left my lungs in a horrified rush. It was Mom standing on the edge of the terrace. Blank, empty eyes staring down at me. Before I could even cry out, she stepped forward and disappeared over the railing. No! I screamed hoarsely, choking on panic. My legs pumped furiously, closing the gap to her house. I tore up the front steps and crashed through the door shouting, "Mom! Emma!" No answer. I ran from room to room, heart in my mouth at what I would find. The house was empty. Quiet. I burst out onto the terrace, eyes darting wildly. But there was no sign of Mom anywhere. No body on the grass 2 stories below. No evidence at all that the impossible scene I had witnessed moments ago had been anything but a sick hallucination. I backed against the wall, shaking uncontrollably. It couldn't be real. It wasn't possible. Was I losing my mind? Emma and Mom got home half an hour later, chatting lightly about their day. They both paused when they saw the state I was in. "Ethan? Sweetie, you look terrible," Mom said, hurrying over. "Are you unwell?" She pressed a hand to my forehead, searching my face with concern. I flinched away from her touch. You're okay? You didn't." I couldn't even say it, because that would mean admitting I was utterly losing it. That my worst fears were coming to life before my eyes. Mom shared a worried look with Emma. "Ethan, you're really worrying us. Let's get you to bed." They led me upstairs, speaking soothingly as if to a frightened animal. Once in bed, Mom made me take some NyQuil to help me sleep. I was too stunned to protest. As she kissed my forehead and turned out the light, the room swam before me. My eyelids grew heavier by the second. Maybe a night of deep, dreamless sleep was exactly what I needed. Surely I would wake up in the morning with everything back to normal. The nightmares banished for good. Comforted by that fragile hope, I surrendered to the pull of sleep. But even in slumber, a small voice whispered that this was only the beginning. The dark reality I feared was still waiting, watching from the shadows. I walked down a nondescript hallway, passing rows of identical doors on either side. There was no way to tell where I was or which way led out. It seemed I had been walking for hours, yet the exit remained elusive. Eventually, the doors began to change. Ominous stains appeared on their surfaces. The hall grew dimmer, the bulbs overhead flickering erratically. I shuddered but kept moving, too afraid to stop. Then a noise from behind made me glance back. One of the doors was open, and something was crawling out of it. I bolted, no longer caring where I was going. The thing pursued me on all fours, gaining ground rapidly. I felt its fetid breath on my neck as its claws scrabbled against the floor. Just as it was about to seize me, I found myself standing in front of my house. Daylight, quiet streets. Gasping in relief, I dashed up the steps and knocked urgently. The door creaked open. I hurried inside, calling for my family. No answers. The house had a musty and used air. Cobwebs stretched across the corners of abandoned rooms. Where was everyone? How long had I been gone? Confused, I kept searching until I came to the kitchen. I froze. A girl sat hunched at the table, limp hair veiling her face. Emma? My voice quavered. Why did she seem so wrong? At the sound of my voice, her head snapped up. My insides turned to ice. Black, fathomless eyes stared back at me from my sister's face. But those eyes, they weren't hers. Something evil lurked behind them. Emma's mouth stretched into an inhuman grin. With a casualness that sickened me, she pressed the tip of a knife to the inside of her forearm. I found my voice. Emma, please. What are you doing? Her possessed gaze held mine. Without breaking eye contact, she slowly drew the blade along her skin, opening up a deep gash that immediately welled with crimson blood. She repeated the motion again and again with methodical precision. I could only watch helplessly, bile rising in my throat. This couldn't be real. My little sister would never. The disturbing scene melted away abruptly. I was back in the school hallway by my locker. Students jostled past on their way to class, laughing and chatting. Had I imagined all of it? The bell rang, jolting me back to reality. Just another nightmare infringing on the waking world. I had to fight to keep them separate. I took my seat in English class, avoiding eye contact. The lesson passed in a haze. At the end of the day, I decided to wait out the crowds before walking home. I didn't want anyone else asking if I was okay. I just needed time alone to sort through the mess in my head. The hallways eventually emptied out. Most of the teachers left too, their cars pulling out of the lot. I sat against a row of lockers, staring blankly at the opposite wall. The shadows lengthened as the sun dipped below the horizon. A janitor whistled tunelessly, pushing his cart down.